Welcome to Bedtime's Sleepy Historian, where history slows down. Here I tell calm, immersive stories from the past, rich with detail, dry humor, and a little bit of magic. Ancient gossip, forgotten traditions, strange laws, mysterious legends, the kind of stories you can sink into at night, or let carry you to sleep. No noise. No rush. Just history, the way it should be told. Subscribe, and let's take our time wandering through the past together. The house at the edge of the marsh. Mirella's cottage leaned like an old man resting on a walking stick, its thatch roof slouching toward the marsh, as if it had grown weary of keeping secrets. The air around it was always green, moss on the stones, algae in the puddles, the smell of crushed mint and damp wood clinging to one's hair long after leaving. In the summer, dragonflies hovered above the reeds like floating gemstones. In the winter, fog arrived in slow, deliberate coils, wrapping the cottage in something that was neither entirely safe nor entirely threatening. Inside, there was no silence. Not really. The sound of leaves whispering against one another filled the air like the low murmur of gossip at a market stall. Mirella never found it strange. She had been born to the noise. Her grandmother had once said that the plants would speak to anyone who listened hard enough, but it took years before Mirella realized this wasn't true for most people. She was sorting a bundle of feverfew when the voice came, faint but impatient. "Too much sun this week," the plant muttered, its leaves twitching. "You're drying me to leather, girl." Mirella looked up from her work, one eyebrow raised. "If I don't dry you, the fevers in the village will come back. And you, my dear, will be blamed for not doing your duty." The feverfew sighed in the way only a plant could, a sound like the rustle of pages. "Duty, yes. But would it kill you to give me a sip of rainwater first?" She obliged, drizzling a little from the copper kettle. The leaves seemed to straighten in gratitude. That was the way of her life. Morning greetings to the sage, stern lectures to the lazy rosemary, gentle comfort for the shy violets, who never liked being clipped. The plants were more than ingredients. They were her neighbors, her colleagues, and sometimes, her only companions. But Mirella had learned not to tell the villagers this. The people of Brackenthorpe were fond of her remedies, but they were not fond of strangeness. And if they suspected their healer was holding full conversations with potted foxglove, they might decide to bring their ailments to someone else, someone less uncanny. Still, whispers had begun. Whispers not unlike the ones she heard from her garden. That she was too young to know as much as she did. That the plants in her yard grew too well, even in poor weather. That she had never once been seen buying seeds. Mirella could ignore gossip from human tongues. But the rumors her plants told her were harder to shake. And lately, they had all been saying the same thing: someone is coming. The stranger on the road. The morning began with the smell of wet thyme. Rain had come in the night, fat drops tapping on Mirella's window until the dark hours were more lullaby than storm. The herbs, grateful for their drink, seemed livelier than usual, their whispers a little too quick, as if each had something urgent to say but none wished to be overheard. She was halfway through grinding dried valerian when the yarrow spoke. "He's almost here." Mirella paused, pestle still in her hand. "Who?" "The one we've been telling you about. The boots. The bag. The questions. Is this another of your riddles?" She tried to keep her tone light, though her shoulders had stiffened. "You'll see," the yarrow replied, in that maddeningly smug way only old plants could manage. By midday, the road that passed her cottage had softened into mud, the ruts filling with murky puddles. She was bent over the low fence, coaxing a stubborn sprig of tansy into standing upright, when she saw him. Tall, in a way that made his shadow seem longer than it should have been. A cloak the color of wet ash. Boots splashed with the road's yellow clay. And slung over his shoulder, a leather satchel with a faint, irregular bulge, as though it carried things that weren't entirely comfortable sharing space. When he reached the fence, he paused, gaze sweeping over the herb beds with the assessing eye of someone who saw more than just greenery. "You're the healer," he said. His voice was steady, but not warm. Mirella straightened. "That depends on who's asking." He smiled faintly, though it didn't quite touch his eyes. "A traveler who's lost his way. And maybe—" his gaze drifted to the feverfew, which seemed to tremble under his attention. "Someone looking for a particular kind of help." From behind her, the rosemary muttered, "Don't trust him." But the violet, shy as ever, whispered, "He smells of old soil. He might be one of us." Mirella folded her arms. "You'd better come inside. The road is full of ears, and not all of them belong to people." A bargain in the kitchen. The man ducked under the lintel as if he'd done it 100 times before, though Mirella was certain she'd never seen him in Brackenthorpe, or anywhere within a day's walk. The cottage kitchen was warm from the small hearth, the air thick with the scent of mint and drying chamomile. Shadows clung in the corners, making the jars of tinctures and bundles of herbs seem like a silent, green audience. He took the seat she gestured to, at the small wooden table by the window. The satchel stayed on his shoulder. "I don't make charms," she said, setting a kettle on the hook above the fire. "And I don't do other things people come here asking for. That's not why I'm here." His eyes roamed the shelves, the hanging roots, the mortar still dusted with valerian. "I'm looking for something I can't buy in a market. Or steal." Mirella turned to face him fully. "And what makes you think I have it?" He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Because they told me." The kettle began its slow sigh toward boiling. Outside, the wind combed through the fennel stalks. "They?" she asked. He leaned forward slightly. "The bracken by the crossroads. The rowan by the old well. Even the nettles along the river bank, they all spoke of you." Mirella's fingers curled against her skirt. "You can hear them." "Not always," he admitted. "Only when the air is thick with rain, or when I haven't eaten in a day or two. But enough." She studied him in the flickering hearthlight. His voice carried no boast, no suspicion, just a worn honesty that was almost worse. From the shelf above the table, the sage piped up. "Ask him his price before you give him a leaf." Mirella poured the boiling water into 2 cups, steam twisting upward like pale, curious spirits. "Then tell me, stranger, what did the plants say I would give you?" He met her gaze evenly. "They said you would give me the name of the plant that can wake the dead." The name he asked for. The steam curled between them, carrying the scent of mint and something sharper, skepticism, perhaps. Mirella kept her hands wrapped around her cup, letting the heat sink into her skin while she weighed his words. "That's not a question you ask lightly," she said at last. "And it's not one I answer at all." The man didn't flinch. "You think I came here on a rumor? I've been to 3 other healers, 2 hedge witches, and 1 charlatan who tried to sell me boiled cabbage water. You're the first one who hasn't laughed." Mirella sipped her tea, though the taste was suddenly bitter. Wake the dead. The phrase had a weight to it, not just in what it meant, but in what it could cost. From the far corner, the dried foxglove rustled in its bundle, a papery hiss. "Tell him to leave. That path leads to rot." The man's hand brushed the satchel at his side, almost unconsciously. "It's not for me," he said, his voice low. "And I don't need them to walk or talk or remember. I just need them to open their eyes. For a moment." Outside, rain began to tap against the shutters. Mirella set her cup down carefully. "If such a plant exists, and I'm not saying it does, it would be rare. Dangerous. And very likely to harm the living more than help the dead." He leaned back slightly, studying her as if trying to read something beyond her words. You know it. I can hear it in your voice. From the hearth, the thyme gave a faint, approving hum. He's persistent. That can be useful. But the rosemary cut in sharply. Or fatal. Mirella ignored them both. Even if I knew the name, I wouldn't speak it without knowing why. The man hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then, with a care that felt almost reverent, he opened the satchel and placed something on the table. It was a locket, silver, tarnished, its clasp worn smooth. Inside, behind a pane of clouded glass, was the face of a young woman. Her eyes, even through the faded miniature, were impossibly alive. This, he said quietly, is why. The locket's story. The woman in the miniature had a look Mirella had seen before, not in paintings, but in moments. The half-smile of someone caught mid-thought. The brightness in the eyes of a person about to speak. Whoever had painted her had captured not just her likeness, but her presence, and that made the stillness of the portrait unsettling. Mirella brushed her thumb over the edge of the locket, feeling the coolness of the metal. She was important to you. The man's gaze didn't leave the picture. She was everything. And she died with words in her mouth I never heard. He closed the locket gently, as though it could bruise. If there's a way to bring her back, just for the breath it would take to finish what she was saying, I'll pay it. In coin, in years of my life, in anything the plant demands. From the rafters, a bunch of drying lavender murmured. This one is heavy with grief. Be careful, it's a weight that pulls others under. Mirella set the locket down between them. If I knew such a plant, I'd tell you that the dead don't come back the way you remember. They return like echoes, frayed at the edges, hollow where the heart should be. And the living often regret asking. I'm already living in regret, he said. All I want is one answer. The kettle hissed faintly as water dripped from its lip onto the embers. The scent of mint grew stronger, as if the room itself were trying to soothe the air. You'd have to go to the Blackwater Hollow, Mirella said finally. If the plant exists anywhere, it's there. But the marsh will take more from you than you're ready to give. His mouth quirked, not in a smile, but in something that looked like relief. Then tell me the name. She hesitated, feeling the weight of every leaf, every root, every whisper in the room leaning toward her. Even the rosemary had gone silent. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than the rain outside. It's called Heart's Whisper. Heart's Whisper. The name seemed to draw the light from the room. Even the flames in the hearth flickered low, as though the syllables themselves had weight. The man repeated it softly, tasting the words. Heart's Whisper. Mirella leaned back, the chair creaking under her. It's a low plant, grows where the ground is damp and the air tastes of iron. Its leaves are thin, silver-green, like frost that's decided to live past morning. The flowers are pale, almost translucent. They open only once a year, and only at midnight. He listened with the focus of someone committing each detail to memory. You'll know it's near, she continued, because the air will feel wrong. Like it's holding its breath. From the table, the thyme muttered, Tell him the rest. Mirella's jaw tightened. If you touch it, it will root to your skin. You'll have to cut it free. And when you brew it, because it must be brewed, it will ask you a question. If you answer truthfully, it will grant you what you seek. If you lie, it will take more than you can give. The man's expression didn't change, but there was a shift in him, like a rope pulled taut. And we're in Blackwater Hollow? She almost laughed, though it came out closer to a sigh. That's the trouble. Blackwater moves. Paths change. What's there one day isn't the next. From the window, the yarrow whispered, He'll go anyway. And she knew it was true. Mirella pushed herself up and went to a small drawer in the corner, pulling out a folded scrap of parchment. She sketched the rough landmarks: an ancient oak split by lightning, a cluster of standing stones that leaned toward one another like conspirators, the curve of the river that led into the marsh's dark heart. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. His were callous, cold from the rain. "This will get you close," she said. "But once you enter the hollow, you'll have to listen. The plants will tell you the rest, if they want you to find it." He tucked the map into his satchel, then stood. "You've given me more than anyone else. I owe you a debt." She shook her head. "You owe me nothing. Just don't give the wrong answer when it asks." For the first time, he smiled, not wide, but real. "I don't plan to." The door closed behind him, and the rain swallowed his figure as he vanished down the road. From the feverfew came a quiet sigh. "He won't be the same when he comes back." When the hollow calls. The cottage felt different after he left. Not quieter. Her plants never truly allowed that, but unsettled, as if the roots beneath the floorboards were shifting. The rain pressed steadily against the windows, blurring the view of the marsh, and somewhere beyond the reeds, a heron called once, low and long. Mirella tried to return to her work, sorting bunches of marigold for drying, but her hands moved without thought. Her mind kept turning over the locket, the name she had spoken, and the way his eyes had lit, not with hope, exactly, but with inevitability. From the rafters, the lavender offered its calm hum. "It's done now. You told him. The rest is his path." But the foxglove was sharper. "Paths cross again. You know they do?" She didn't answer. Instead, she lit a fresh taper candle and placed it by the window, a habit she'd learned from her grandmother, an unspoken wish for the traveler's safe return, though she suspected safety had little to do with his journey. That night sleep came slowly. She dreamed of the hollow as she had last seen it, years ago, in another season. The air there was thick and warm, the ground trembling faintly underfoot as though it were breathing. Trees grew at odd angles, their trunks dark as wet ink, and the water between them gleamed like black glass. She remembered standing ankle-deep, hearing voices ripple from the lilies that floated on its surface. Some voices sweet, some urgent, and some too cold to belong to anything human. When Mirella woke, the light was thin, a pale wash over the marsh. And in that quiet between bird calls she felt it, faint, but certain. The hollow was calling again. Not to her. To him. And it had been a long time since it called without wanting something in return. The hollow stirs. 2 days passed before she saw him again, not in person, but in the way the marsh changed. Mirella knew the signs. The fog rose earlier than usual, curling in slow, deliberate ribbons that clung to the earth instead of drifting away. The frogs grew silent at dusk, and the wind seemed to circle the cottage, never quite touching it, as if avoiding her altogether. From the fennel by the path came a whisper. "He's in the hollow now." She paused mid-step, the bundle of fresh mint in her hands. "Already?" "He found the oak and the stones. The river let him in." "But the hollow—" The fennel's voice dropped, hushed with a kind of leafy dread. "It's listening to him." Mirella carried the mint inside, but her mind wouldn't rest. The hollow was dangerous enough when it was quiet. When it listened, it was hunting. That evening she sat by the fire, staring into the flames while her plants argued around her. The rosemary wanted her to close the shutters and let the man's fate be his own. The violets, timid but earnest, thought she should follow and guide him. The foxglove, with its bitter pragmatism, simply said, "If he finds it, he may bring it back here. Are you ready for that?" She didn't answer them. Instead, she reached for the small wooden box beneath her bed. Inside lay a folded piece of oilskin, and within that, a map, not of landmarks, but of plant voices. Circles for groves where the birches sang in the wind, dotted lines for thickets where brambles whispered warnings, black crosses for places even she would not step. Her grandmother had told her the map was not fixed. The plants moved their homes when they pleased. But sometimes, if you were lucky, or if they were, paths overlapped. Mirella laid the map flat on the table. Somewhere in that black, shifting tangle, a man was looking for Heart's Whisper. And she wasn't sure whether she wanted him to find it, or fail. Into the marsh. By dawn, she had decided. Not because she wanted to help him, at least, that's what she told herself, but because the hollow was unpredictable when stirred. If it took him, it might not stop with him. She packed light, a satchel of dried elderflower, a flask of clean water, a bundle of willow bark, and a single iron knife. The plants offered their murmurs as she moved about the cottage. The thyme wished her luck. The rosemary warned her not to trust her ears. The feverfew, ever dramatic, told her to write a will. When she stepped outside, the morning air was wet and metallic, as if it had been steeped in rust. Mist hung low, shrouding the marsh in a pale veil. She followed the narrow track toward the standing stones, her boots sinking into the soft earth. It didn't take long for the world to change. The path that should have curved gently along the river's edge bent instead toward a darker grove. Trees leaned closer together, their branches knitting overhead to dim the light. The air grew thick, not warm, exactly, but close, as if the marsh itself were pressing in. From somewhere unseen came the faintest ripple of sound. Not water. Not wind. Words. Mirella. She froze, heart tightening. The voice was her grandmother's. She knew better than to answer. The hollow liked to wear familiar voices. Still, it came again, softer, coaxing. You shouldn't be here, child. Mirella pushed forward, every sense straining. The ground began to tremble faintly beneath her boots, the way it did before a hard rain, except the sky above was pale and still. Somewhere ahead, a dark smear in the mist resolved into a figure. Tall. Cloaked. Moving slowly, as if listening for something just beyond reach. The man had made it this far. But the hollow had found him first. The question in the air. He didn't see her at first. His attention was fixed on the ground before him, where the soil looked damp enough to swallow a man whole. The mist curled thick around his knees, and every few steps he paused, head tilted, as though catching the thread of a voice just out of earshot. Mirella moved closer, careful to keep her steps light. When she was within a dozen paces, the air shifted, warmer, scented faintly with something sweet, almost like honey left too long in the sun. She knew that smell. Heart's Whisper. The man turned suddenly, eyes locking on hers. His face was pale, drawn tight, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, purpose, not panic. You followed me, he said. I'm here to keep you alive, she replied, glancing past him. The mist was thicker now, pulsing faintly like breath. Somewhere in its folds, she thought she saw the silver gleam of narrow leaves. He stepped aside, revealing it fully. A small plant, no taller than her hand, grew from the black, waterlogged earth. Its leaves shimmered faintly despite the dim light, and from its center rose a single flower the color of moonlight through ice. Even from here, she could feel it watching. You found it, she whispered. It found me, he corrected. The hollow seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, the distant drip of water, the faint rustle of reeds, fell away until there was nothing but the two of them and the plant. Then came the voice. Not in the air, but inside her head. Low, deliberate, neither male nor female. What will you give for what you seek? Mirella's breath caught. The question wasn't for her. It was speaking to him. He knelt, eyes locked on the flower. Anything. The plant's leaves shivered. Truth, or you will be taken. He hesitated. Mirella saw his throat work as he swallowed. Then he said, My years. However many I have left. The hollow stirred, and the ground beneath them seemed to sigh. Accepted. The bloom opens. The flower's petals unfurled in slow, deliberate arcs, as though the plant were stretching after a long sleep. A pale glow radiated from its center, not bright enough to banish the mist, but enough to turn the air around it into liquid silver. The sweetness in the scent deepened, curling low into Mirella's lungs until she had to fight the urge to lean closer. The man's eyes stayed fixed on the bloom. His face was lit in that cold light, making him look both younger and more worn at once. From the heart of the flower, a droplet formed, clear as water, heavy as mercury, and fell soundlessly into the black soil. Where it landed, the earth rippled, as if disturbed by something moving beneath. Mirella's fingers tightened on the strap of her satchel. Once you brew it, you'll have one question. That's all. I know. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he reached for the stem. The plant didn't resist, but when he touched it, the roots clung, thin, silver threads burrowing into his skin like embroidery needles. He drew a sharp breath, knife already in hand. With a single motion, he cut the stem free, leaving the roots writhing before they sank back into the soil. A drop of blood welled where they had clung. The hollow exhaled. The mist shifted, thinning slightly, and the sounds of water and wind returned in careful fragments. He wrapped the flower in a strip of cloth, tucking it into his satchel as though sealing away a live coal. It's done! Mirella didn't move. The hollow rarely gave without wanting a reminder of the bargain it had made. Sure enough, the ground shivered once more, and the flower's voice returned, not in his mind alone this time, but in hers as well. You will not both leave. Her breath caught. She met his gaze, and in that instant they both understood, this had never been a gift freely given. The hollow's choice. The mist thickened again, swirling up from the ground as if pulled by unseen hands. The air tasted colder now, edged with metal, and every instinct in Mirella screamed to move, but her boots felt heavy, rooted. The man's jaw tightened. It was my bargain, not hers. The voice of the hollow came again, low and unhurried. One to stay, one to go. Mirella's mind raced. The hollow's rules were old, older than any path or map. It didn't care for fairness, it cared for balance. Something had been taken, so something must remain. He stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the heart's whispers patch of earth. Take me. But the mist seemed to curl toward her instead, slow and deliberate, wrapping around her legs like cold cloth. She knows our tongue, the hollow murmured, almost with amusement. She will grow well here. Mirella's breath came sharp. Roots, not hers, pressed against her ankles beneath the soil. They were thin, questing, curious. She felt them test the edges of her skin. The man turned to her, eyes fierce. Run! I can't, she said, and she wasn't sure if it was the roots holding her or the hollow's voice inside her mind. From somewhere in the mist, the violet's shy, distant whisper reached her, not from her cottage, but here, impossibly. Answer it. Her heart pounded. The hollow's bargains always ended with a question. And if the answer pleased it? She raised her chin, meeting the shifting pale light in the mist. What's the question? The silence that followed was thick, stretching long enough for her to wonder if the hollow had grown bored. Then, why do you speak to them? Mirella didn't need to ask who them was. She thought of her garden, her grandmother, the whispers at dawn and dusk. Because they listen, she said. The mist paused. The roots retreated. And then the hollow laughed, a sound like water breaking through ice. The way out. The laughter rolled through the hollow, rattling leaves, stirring the black water at their feet. It was not cruel, but it wasn't warm either. It was the sound of something ancient amused for reasons it didn't bother to explain. Go, it said at last. The mist loosened, unraveling into pale ribbons that drifted upward and away. The pressure in the air eased. Mirella staggered back, boots free of the soil's grip, heart hammering against her ribs. The man reached for her arm, steadying her. "What did you do?" "Answered," she said, still catching her breath. And it liked the answer. He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "That's it. All this," he gestured to the hollow around them, the silver gleam of the Heart's Whisper patch, the still shifting shadows. "And it let us go because you talked to it?" "I didn't talk to it," Mirella corrected, glancing once more at the small flower's bare stem. "I talked to its kin." They didn't linger. The hollow was already changing, the trees leaning in new directions, the ground beneath the roots rearranging. Mirella led them toward what she hoped was the curve of the river, trusting the faintest hum of familiar voices in the reeds. By the time they reached the edge of the marsh, the light was dimming into a soft blue-gray. The air smelled of wet grass instead of iron. Only then did she allow herself to look at him fully. The bargain had marked him. Fine silver lines traced up from the cut on his hand, like veins of frost beneath the skin. They pulsed faintly, in time with his heartbeat. He noticed her staring. "It's the price," he said simply. "And the question?" she asked. His gaze drifted to the satchel where the flower was wrapped. "I'll ask it tonight." Mirella nodded, though something in her tightened. Bargains made in the hollow had a way of feeling unfinished, even once you'd walked away. From behind them, deep in the marsh, came one last whisper. Not from the hollow. From the Heart's Whisper itself. "Next time you answer for him." The question in the dark. Night fell like ink poured into a basin. They had made camp on a rise above the marsh, where the ground was firm and the air no longer carried that faint copper tang. Mirella tended the fire, watching the sparks leap and vanish, while the man, he still had not offered a name, unwrapped the small parcel of oilcloth holding the Heart's Whisper. It was even paler in the firelight, its petals so thin they seemed carved from frost. The air around it hummed, not loudly, but insistently, like a finger tapping the edge of one's mind. He sat cross-legged, staring at it. "I'm supposed to hold it in my palm," he said quietly, "and ask what I want most to know. It will answer truthfully. That's the bargain." Mirella's hands tightened on the wooden spoon she was using to stir the small pot of broth. "And the price?" He glanced at the faint silver veins along his arm. "Already paid." The hum deepened, as if the flower itself was aware it was being discussed. He cupped it in his palm, his expression shifting, part awe, part fear. "What will you ask?" Mirella asked. He hesitated for a long time, his eyes on the pale petals. The fire popped softly, sending a spiral of smoke between them. Finally he spoke. "I want to know, the day I die." Mirella's breath caught. "You'd carry that weight?" "I already carry worse," he said, and before she could stop him, he bent his head and whispered the question into the Heart's Whisper. The flower trembled. For a moment, it seemed to dissolve into light, its edges blurring, its pale glow seeping into his palm. Then the light sank into his skin. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in the shock of knowing something irreversible. Mirella leaned forward. "What did it tell you?" He met her gaze, and in the wavering firelight, his expression was unreadable. "It told me, you're there." A petal's prophecy. The words hung between them like a rope no one wanted to touch. Mirella felt the marsh wind curl around her neck, colder than before. The fire hissed softly as sap bled from a log, but she barely heard it. "You're certain?" she asked, though her voice was flat, as if she already believed him. He nodded once. It wasn't vague. The heart's whisper doesn't speak in riddles. It showed me the place, the day, the weather. And you standing there. She drew her shawl tighter, thinking of all the ways such a thing could be twisted by fate. She had seen predictions fulfilled by accident, by stubbornness, by people walking straight into the very trap they feared. You think it means I cause it, she said. He tilted his head. Maybe. Or maybe you stop it. But either way, you're there when the end comes. The marsh around them murmured with the night, frogs, soft splashes, the whisper of reeds shifting in the unseen current. Mirella stared into the flames, unwilling to ask the one question pressing at her ribs. How soon? Instead, she reached for the pot and ladled broth into 2 tin cups. She handed one to him. To the living, she said, raising hers. He met her toast with a faint smile. To the living. They drank in silence, the flower now lying between them on a folded scrap of cloth. Even in stillness, it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat no one could hear. Far off in the marsh, something answered the wind with a sound too deliberate to be chance, a slow rustle, then stillness again. Neither spoke of it, but both listened. The marsh keeps secrets. They sat longer than they meant to, the broth cooling in their hands, both pretending the sound had been nothing. But the marsh was a place Mirella knew too well to dismiss. A frog's splash had rhythm, a reed's sway had a pattern. This had neither. It was not nature's idle music, but the sound of something deciding whether or not to come closer. She set her cup down, and moved the flower gently into her satchel, wrapping it twice in linen. Its faint pulse seemed to steady under her touch, as if it trusted her more than the air. You're not staying the night here, the old man said, his tone final. I am, she replied. The marsh will not harm me. It doesn't harm, he said softly. It chooses. They packed in silence, and she followed him through the low paths, boots sinking into peat, fireflies swirling like quiet stars around their knees. When they reached the rise where the land began to dry, he stopped. Whatever speaks to you, plant, wind, or water, listen harder than you ever have, he said. It will speak less and mean more. She nodded, but didn't promise. By the time she reached her own garden, the moon was silvered low, and her plants stood in an attentive hush. Even the mint leaves seemed angled toward her, as if they too had heard something in the marsh. She stepped inside the gate, and one of the lavender stalks brushed her arm, not by the wind, but in a motion far too precise. Mirella, it whispered. It wasn't her imagination. The marsh's secret had followed her home. When the garden learned her name, the days that followed felt like waking inside a dream she had been carrying for years. Her mornings began not with the rooster's cry or the clatter of buckets in the lane, but with the soft chorus of voices rising from the dew. Time greeted her in clusters of tiny syllables, rosemary spoke in long, unbroken streams, and the lavender always said her name first, as though to be certain she had not wandered away in the night. Words spread quietly through the village that Mirella's garden was not like other gardens. Some came with baskets to trade, some with questions they would not dare bring to the priest. She answered none of them directly. A truth spoken aloud could bruise. Instead, she listened. She listened to the foxglove when it warned her of rain 2 days early. She listened to the basil when it hinted which neighbor's cough was not from the cold. She listened to the marsh's strange flower, whose pulse slowed each evening in her care, as though at last it had found safe soil. And in time, Mirella realized the voices were not new, they had always been there, in the wind's bend through the stems, in the trembling of petals before frost. She had not learned their language. She had simply grown quiet enough for it to reach her. On the last night of summer, as the sky went dark and warm, she stood in her garden barefoot, eyes closed, surrounded by the perfume of mint and sage. Mirella, the garden breathed, not as a greeting now, but as a keeping. And for the first time, she understood what it was to be rooted in a place, and loved back by it.